Kanaka, I'm Stanley Simpson and welcome to Reset Fiji, a pioneering initiative brought to you by civil society, academia, and mainstream media. Reset Fiji seeks to provide a platform for robust discussions, ideas, innovations, and solutions. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Fiji was hit by Category 4 Cyclone Harold. Fiji's economic fault lines have been exposed, laying bare the gaps where our people and communities are falling through. Last Sunday's panel on the economy, we heard very clearly the challenges of these twin disasters: job losses, closure of businesses, food shortages, increasing anxiety, and violence against women, just to name a few. COVID-19 is a watershed moment. But one of the key industries what was clear message from last week's panel, that a key industry that could save us is agriculture, and the need to prioritize agriculture as part of the reset. Joining me today on the panel are 5 leaders in their respective fields: academics, pioneers of agriculture, and farmers, the sons and daughters of the land, who will share their views, experiences, and challenges, and most importantly, ideas on what we can do or on what they believe is possible for us in the future. Today's panel will present components of agriculture and to consider the short-term and long-term steps that can be taken to improve agriculture in Fiji. On my far right, welcome Dr. Andrew McGregor, agricultural economist, a veteran of the industry with decades of experience. He's also on the board of the Tutu Rural Training Center in Taviuni. Ratu Levi Tora is a commercial farmer and farmer leader. He's the chairman of Nature's Way Cooperative. Lavinia Kometotoya is a farmer and program manager of the Pacific Island Farmers Organization Network. Kyle Stice is a farmer, commercial farmer, and a fresh produce exporter. And Wa Singh, farmer, businessman, and running machine. Welcome to the panel. Welcome to Reset Fiji, the focus on agriculture. Without further ado, I'll invite Dr. McGregor to give his main points today.
Vinaka Stanley. Yeah, I'd just like to make a few overview points, which the other people who are more directly involved will elaborate on. I think there's 3 key points I want to talk about. Is first of all, what are the key roles of agriculture? One of the key roles is to provide food security. Now, what does that involve? Well, the obvious thing it means is it produces food. But perhaps even more important, it provides the income to be able to buy food, and that's often overlooked. So that's the first area of main point we'll discuss. The other one is that we've got to keep in mind that Fiji is now essentially an urban society. Around 55% of the people here live in either urban or peri-urban areas. Now, there are opportunities for people to go back to agriculture or grow things in peri-urban areas, and this should be encouraged, but it should be done properly, and there's lots of issues to deal with that people like Wa can talk about very, very specifically. So that there's opportunities to be able to go back to agriculture. But there are major challenges which we need to recognise in doing that, and opportunities, and we've got to be realistic. And the other panel members, I said, Wa and Lavinia and Levi are directly involved in that area, and they will talk what are some of the challenges and how are we going to do this properly. Now, the other key area is that we've got to remember that Fiji is a small country, less than 1 million people, and by necessity, we have to be a substantial importer, and that's the reality that we have to live with. And a significant part of those imports are food. Some of that can be replaced. There are certainly really excellent opportunities for producing more of our own food, but even the best case scenario, we have to be able to import food. And And we have to have foreign exchange to be able to import that food. You can't get food unless you've got the money to pay for it. And that's going to be a major challenge because now with the collapse of tourism, now over time we all hope that it will gradually recover, but we've shown us that we've been over-dependent on this tourism sector. Now we need to encourage its redevelopment and getting back where it was before, but in the meantime we have to look at other ways of being able to generate foreign exchange. And agriculture provides some of those opportunities. And there are a number of areas where we certainly have a comparative advantage. We have advantage because where we are, the climate, our people, our background, etc. Now, the main area where we do have real opportunities of growth is in the area of horticultural type products. Whole range of those, and some of them are directly involved in the growing and exporting of these things like papaya, ginger, turmeric, basil, and of course kava. Now, the reality is though, to be able to capture export markets for our size, we have to, at least initially, and to a large extent, even the long term, has to be based on air freight. Now, the problem is with our provision of air freight, it's just a subsidiary of tourism. It's all built around our industry, our national airline, essentially built around providing access to the country for tourists. Now, we need to now re-look at that if we're going to encourage the growth of these industries. We know there are markets for them, and we have a reasonable track record of developing, and some of these industries have actually shown some possibility for expansion due to the pandemic, and people like Kyle who are involved in the export of basil will be able to elaborate. So some of these, there actually has been some growth. Now, whether this is sustained is another matter, but there are opportunities, but we have to have realistic access to those markets, and that requires air freight. So our national airline has to, it has to serve tourism, but it has to look more realistically at how it's going to support these industries. And that's to deal with freight capacity and particular freight rates. And Kyle will talk specifically about those issues, that you've got to have freight rates that are sustainable, not just rates that are viable for that particular airline, or that particular flight at a particular time. And a national airline has to have a much broader perspective. And we have some examples worldwide of where this role has been taken. In Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Africa, and in Thailand, they have developed substantial horticultural exports, but this has very much depended on the approach taken by that national airline, which was more than just supplying passengers and bringing in tourists, and we'll talk specifically about those. So those are the 3 points, the 3 areas that I think are extremely important for people to understand. Vanaka? Before
we pass it on, I just want 2 questions. Can you just define more what horticultural agriculture is about, and these products that you've spoken about to move in, like papaya, turmeric, ginger, basil. You talk about the freighting. Can they be achieved in small scale or large scale to be viable? If you can touch on that.
No, a lot of these are actually smaller scale. Some are larger scale. What we call them niche markets. Some of these niches are a result of where we are in the globe, off-season. Some of them because they have particular climatic advantages, particularly soils. So they're by and large niche. We're not talking about major commodities, although there are opportunities to improve some of our major commodities, and we have to face up to the realities when reality is sugar prices now are at an exceptionally low level, and that has implications how we're going to support this industry when we've got less government revenue to be able to do it. But by and large, we are talking about these niche products. Most of them are perishable. They're not all perishable. Some of them are not perishable. So that means if you get reasonable size, you can sea freight. Now, sea freight has been affected, but nothing like air freight. But most of them are fairly perishable, and they have to get to the market quickly. If not, you lose everything. and you lose it a few times, then you don't do any more. And we've got to remember that there are big linkages with these products. People think, oh, it's just the exporter making money. So you look at some of the things like, say, turmeric. That's grown by, well, not really grown, it's a wild harvest product, mainly comes from the highlands of Italy. Lots and lots of people depend on that income. And they need that income to buy some of their food. Yeah, they can grow a lot of their own food, but there's certain essential necessities of life that they have to be able to buy. Now, if these markets are closed, where do they get their money to be able to do that? So we have to have a much broader idea of what food security and agriculture is all about. Yes, it is growing more food, and we can certainly do that much better, but it's generating income to be able to buy food. And the reality is a lot of that income has to come from exports, particularly now that tourism is going to take a long, long time to recover. That's the reality. Unfortunately, we became over-dependent on tourism. It's great what we did, but we have to look at other ways. And there are other industries, of course, that can generate income, but this focus of this particular meeting is on agriculture.
Thank you for that. I'd like to now introduce and welcome again Ratu Levi Tora. He was a commercial sugarcane farmer who has diversified into horticultural crops and agritourism. He's a farmer leader and chairman of Nature's Way Cooperative. You have the floor.
Thank you, Stan. Well, one of our big issues that we are facing in our industry, so we basically represent the fruit and vegetable industry, fresh fruit export. So due to COVID, we haven't been able to run our business. And the domino effect has affected everyone along the supply chain, not only the exporters, but right down to the farmers. The farmers, the suppliers, and everybody along our supply chain. So when you talk about these actors in the chain, they basically represent not only their companies, but their families as well. So when they're not able to put food on the table, then everything just goes downward spiral. And so everybody's been affected in our industry. It's a very tricky industry. We deal with perishable products, mainly papaya, eggplant, breadfruit, and mango. And when you can't push these products overseas, then you know the repercussions happens, and everybody loses out. Regarding land issues at the moment, everybody's trying to get back into farming. As someone who's been brought up in the village, we've just seen the increase in land disputes. People are coming back to the village to try and farm the land. And as you know, the land is owned by the Matangali, by the Toka, the clans and the sub-clans. And you've just seen an influx in people coming from urban areas trying to infiltrate these land that have been lying dormant all this time. So there's a lot of problems happening in our villages. People are fighting over land as we speak. So these are some of the effects of people trying to find access back into their land. And so it's not an easy way out. People are looking for sources of income, sources of livelihood. They're trying to promote any kind of economic activity back in their villages, but it's really not straightforward. And one problem that we've observed too is for people in the rural areas and the villages, we've sort of adopted this reservation mentality. We're just being used to getting handouts from government. And this has been the practice for so many years. And again, we see the government, again, supplying seedlings, planting material. And this is just goes to show that people are always used to getting handouts from government. And this will always be the practice going forward. And if the mentality can change, we'll be in a better position to counter the effects of COVID. So those are just my opening comments regarding...
I just wanted to ask you, because you're a farmer that you used to do sugarcane.
Yes, sir.
And there's a lot of discussion, a lot of talk about people moving on from sugarcane. I know it's an industry, as we all know, it's struggle used to be our main industry. How do you see the difference, the move, like when you did sugarcane and how you've moved on into other crops? If you can talk about your experience.
Okay, thank you. So the sugarcane industry, to be frank, is a dying industry. My grandfather was a sugarcane farmer, my father was a sugarcane farmer, very successful. And when it was my turn, we realized that it wasn't economical. Even though we went big scale, a lot of the problems arose during the harvesting season. And so I'm really looking forward to this harvesting season 2020 because I know there's a lot of problems that will start popping up in regards to labor, in regards to farmers trying to get their trucks ready for the season. And of course, they have to service their debts, mortgages, If you look at all these towns down in the west, Singatoka, Nandi, Lotoka, Mbarakiraki, these are all cane belt towns. They're not tourism towns, they're cane belt towns. And if you ask any retailer there, when do you make money? Everybody will tell you they make money during the cane harvesting season. That's when money comes into the system. Farmers get paid, truck drivers get paid, FSC workers get paid. And so there's a lot of money being pushed into these small towns. As soon as the harvesting season finishes, you'll just see the activity go slow. And Nandi is an exception. It's always been a tourist hotspot. But for these other major towns, these are all cane belt towns. And again, it's always been a neglected industry. But for me, diversifying into non-sugar industry, it's been a big challenge as well. So I started to tap into agro-tourism. So basically merging agriculture with tourism. And again, you have your challenges there because tourism industry is a different ball game altogether. So here you see a farmer trying to tap into the tourism industry, going through using farming as a sort of a way to get to generate some activity, economic activity. But again, the tourism industry has its own challenges, and its own. They basically ask you to get your insurance organized. You have to be compliant with all the rules and regulations regarding the tourists. By the time you crunch all the numbers, it's not economical as well. It's a very high-risk game to play as well. So just to tell people that it's not easy, and you'll have to strike a balance if you're trying to make it out there, going on from non-sugar to, from sugar to non-sugar.
So interesting point. Moving on from our two big industries, tourism and sugar, to other diversified products, but it's all still very new to an extent. At this point in time, I just want to talk about the poll from last week's panel. We value your opinions, your feedbacks, and of course the big ideas that came through in the discussions on social media and from the program that came. We asked people what's the top 5 areas of interest coming out of the economic panel. And from the public, the top 5 areas was diversification of the economy, finding innovation solutions, food security, agriculture, fisheries, and the care economy. So I think people are understanding, with the discussion, the key issues that need to be looked at as we try and become for a more resilient economy in the country. So after this panel discussion, we'll be running another poll. Your feedback is important, so you can check out the results of this poll on the Reset Fiji Facebook page and on Twitter. I am open to a question from the audience, if someone wants a question now, or we will move on. If someone have a burning question to Levi or Dr. McGregor at this point. All right, we will move on, and from the Pacific Island Farmers Network, Lavinia Kome-Tutoya, you have the floor.
Stan, I'm going to start with what I'm passionate about, women in agriculture. For me, I think it's very important that we involve women in the decision-making, implementation, and monitoring of projects in agriculture. I believe that when you have women in the scheme of things, you'll get better success. It's like in a family. It's the mother that runs the home. She's the glue. She's the one that whips up the father and the children. Yeah, a typical example, and this was discussed in I think in the panel last week, was NCDs. Today, backyard farming, gardening, is the new fashion, the new trend. Get the mothers involved, give them the nutritional planting materials, the fruit trees, and you'll be assured that whatever the mother plants and the children plants, it's going to get into their menus. And this is just one simple way of fighting NCDs. My second point is there is a need to provide new and existing farmers with access to key services, planting materials, seeds, pest management. There's a whole array of key services, market information. Recently, I hosted a training with my neighborhood women back at home on soil preparation. And it was targeted for mothers and daughters in Navakai and Nandi. We asked the group how many of them had gotten seeds from the distribution. There were 4 of them. And we asked them, where are the seeds? They still had the seeds. They hadn't planted the seeds. And we asked them, why? The simple answer came back, we don't know. So in agriculture, the simple things we can't assume, for the backyard gardener, for new farmers. And this is where my point is. Traditionally, this sort of information one would get from extension officers with the Ministry of Agriculture. But agriculture has since turned, and I'm not too sure the ratio of extension officers to farmers, whether it's 1 to 100, 1 to 500. I stand to be corrected. But since COVID, it would have increased more, because now you have urban dwellers and peri-urban dwellers doing backyard gardening. So it's the simple questions like, where do I get seed X? Where do I get fertilizer Y? Why is my tomatoes drying on the top or curling? Why are the bugs eating my Chinese cabbage? Why is my dahlia dying? So I'm going on to my third point, which is really farmer organizations. And I work for the Secretariat for Pacific Island Farmers Organization Network. The new trend today is that farmers organize themselves into farmer organizations, into clusters, into associations, into groups, whether formal or informal. Here in Fiji, PIFON members are Tete Taviuni and Tutu Rural Training Center in Taviuni. We have Nature's Way Cooperation in Nandi. We have South Sea Orchids and the Floriculture Support Association. We have Rise Beyond the Reef. We have Mbula Agro. We have Friend. If I've missed, I think I've covered everybody. But these are the big farmer organizations that are present in Fiji. And these are the people that farmers can go to get this sort of information. For example, Friend has been pushing out online videos on backyard gardening tips and tricks. I know that we've been working with our member in Nandi, Bula Agro. He's about to push out soil preparation, how to plant a seed, how to fix your eaten cabbage. But it's, again, critical information that we can't assume, that we need to make sure that new farmers and existing farmers still go through. My point about farmer organizations, government. Government can work with farmer organizations to actually extend the reach of their extension services or even their research services. They can go through the farmer organizations to do this, because farmer organizations have the technical capacity, they have the information, they have planting materials, they have seeds, and this is a way of getting more people better acquainted into agriculture, because it's a science. it's not simple once you start it. And at the end of the day, it's really what you put in the pocket for your family and the good food that you put on the table. And in order to do that, you need good technical quality information to be able to carry that out.
Thank you. I just want to ask, because from the panel last week, there was a lot of talk from some of the panelists that government has a responsibility. They can't just pass it on to people. So to those who have that argument, that government has the responsibility to reach out to everyone in terms of getting more extension officers, putting more resources into the agriculture industry. What would be your counter response?
I'd disagree. I think that we can help ourselves first. We need to be self-reliant, and farmer organizations is a great answer to that. Farmers helping farmers, farmers exchanging planting material, farmers teaching other farmers how to plant. You don't need to go to the extension officer. You can work, the farmer organizations can work with the extension officer, and then it's the farmer organization who can then go down, because they have the membership, and and most of the farmer organizations are really, it's location based. So the extension officer will not be at your farm every day. I've been farming now for a couple of years. I have not had an extension officer come to my farm, simply because I know the pressure that they're under. If I need them, I call them or I run to them. But otherwise, it's to the PFON network and to the other farmers that I turn to. How do I fix this? How do I do this? Where do I get that? Or if I have access, then I'm sharing it. Farmer organizations is about sharing information. And that's the new norm.
You're based in Nandi. I just want to ask another question. You're based in Nandi, and that's where a lot of the job losses are happening now. We know about the Fiji Airways workers that have been laid off and job losses from the tourism industry. Where are these people who are now turning into farming, as we're seeing? Where are they turning to?
Interesting, because my husband is one of those. He's a full-time farmer now, and he has time.
Sorry, your husband lost his job?
My husband is one of the terminated flight attendants, but when he was flying, he didn't have the time to really attend to the farm. Now he has all the time in the world, and we're moving the farm. It's pretty exciting. And it's not just him. We've run a couple of trainings with flight attendants, with displaced hotel workers, and they're coming out. And it's just this little tips and tricks, this little information that we need to share with them, and they're off on a good start. But they're out there. Some of them are going back to their land, as Levi alluded to, but many of them are still there around Nandi, and they're looking at, again, as flight attendants, they are taught to do plan A, plan B, plan C. So they're quite a resilient group of people, and there's options that they are doing and working on.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lavinia Kaumaitotoya, Pacific Island Farmers Network. Now we'll move on to Kyle Stice, who's a commercial farmer and fresh produce exporter. You have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Stan. Look, fresh produce exports has always been difficult. Well before COVID-19, we struggle with issues like pest and disease, with high freight costs, with shelf life. And despite all of these challenges exporting fresh produce, our company and a number of other companies around Fiji, they've really thrived over the last 20 or 30 years. And fresh produce exports, as Andrew alluded to, makes a substantial contribution in the sector. Companies like ours, you know, only about 14 staff, but quite a wide range of service providers that are feeding in to this industry. We ship 50 weeks a year, and everything rolls relatively smooth. When the travel restrictions started, all of the flights stopped, and we couldn't get our basil from Nandi to the market in Auckland. But the farm is planted on a cycle, so we have to keep harvesting. And so we were essentially harvesting and dumping, and harvesting and dumping. And we started hearing about freight flights. So we started discussing with the freight agent and with the airline about the opportunity for cargo-only freight flights. And they sent us a breakdown, and it said, this is the cost to run an A330 from Nandi to Auckland and return. And they said, divide that cost by the amount of cargo that it can hold, and here's the cost of your freight. And of course, we sort of jumped at the cost of it. But we said, okay, where can we pass this cost along? And our particular high-value crop, we found a way to cope up with that high freight cost. So they said, okay, we need expressions of interest. So you make a booking, and then once we get enough bookings, then we'll run the flight. So we said, okay, we put our hand up, and we got on the first flight, and everything went smooth. The second week, flight was canceled. They said, oh, we didn't get enough bookings. So we started to advocate. We said, look, it takes us about 7 days from the start of harvesting to get ready to load onto the airplane. We said we can't be waiting to see if the flight is going to happen or not. We told the airline, we said, you just need to commit to a schedule of flights. Commit to 1 month, and the industry will respond. Sure enough, Fiji Airways committed to it, committed to 1 flight a week with Auckland. And over the last couple of months, it's grown from 1 flight a week to now 3 flights a week. And a majority of that is fresh produce going into these markets. And similar flight schedules are going into Sydney and into Los Angeles. And I remember talking to the freight agent one day at Nandi Airport, and they were loading about 30 tons of taro going to Sydney. And I remember talking to him and wondering whether the airline and the public knew how many rural people are benefiting from this 30 tons of taro going overseas. This is not 1 farmer or 2 farmers. These are several hundred farmers who are receiving money directly to them in their rural villages because they're supplying for export. So it was an encouraging, it was a little bit of a success story, the cargo freight services. I'll have to say the freight rates are still too high, and with the current freight rates, we can only grow so much because the cost of our product in New Zealand is so high because we have to deal with these high costs. But I believe that there is scope to relook at that. Just a quick side note, remember when we were advocating for these cargo flights for agriculture, there was a member of the public who was saying, why do we need freight flights to take our food overseas? We should be keeping all of the food here in Fiji for the people of Fiji. And I responded to him and I said, look, if there's anybody who will buy 1 ton of basil every week, I will gladly sell it onto the domestic market. But there simply isn't enough people to buy 1 ton of basil every week here in Fiji. And this brings me to my next point, that agriculture exports are very important. Now, domestic markets are very important, and I don't want to understate that. As Andrew mentioned, we have a lot that we can do to reduce imports, to improve the nutrition by producing more food locally. But the reality is, we only have less than 1 million people, and we have a huge resource of rich soils. So we are going to be able to produce more than the domestic market can consume. And therefore, livelihood opportunities are going to rest with being able to grow excess and then therefore send it overseas. And if you look at the current stat, it's agriculture exports, fresh produce exports, that are the main contributor to foreign currency coming back into the country. And those foreign currency are going right down to the pockets of rural farmers. And so I just wanted to stress how important agriculture exports are and how important it is that partnerships with national airline, partnerships with policy makers take into consideration how valuable this sector can be to putting money into the hands of rural people so that they can buy some of the essentials that they need. You know, it's great we can grow some things, but you still have to have some money to buy the things that you need. And that is a critical point that I wanted to thank Andrew for making. And thanks for having us on.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the reset, how do you see the balance between the domestic agriculture for the domestic market and agriculture for export?
Well, again, if you're growing to feed your family, that's fantastic. If you can reduce a little bit your weekly grocery bill, we want to encourage that as much as possible. But if you're growing in order to make money, domestic markets are very risky. We've all seen in the last couple of weeks the price of leafy vegetables, price of cucumbers. They've dropped radically, and they're going to continue to drop. So if you were planting cucumbers or Chinese cabbage thinking that you're going to make money, you're going to be severely disappointed. And so this is the nature of these kind of domestic markets. Still, the price of cassava is quite good, but look at it in about 10 months' time, and if you're a farmer selling cassava into the local market, it's going to be a very low price. Whereas exports provides us with a little bit more stability. The prices don't have these huge increases and decreases. So for livelihoods, for income generation, exports provides the real opportunity for farmers to grow and sell excess. And so there's a lot more that we can do, substituting the rice and the potatoes with the taro and the kumala and the breadfruit, absolutely, 100%. But in terms of livelihoods, so people that come to me and say, hey, I lost my job, I want to make money from agriculture, we have to be realistic about what sort of income you can actually earn selling into the domestic market when our population is very small. And a major buyer of a lot of these horticulture crops in the domestic market was the tourism sector. Our company was 80% export, 20% domestic. And of that 20% domestic, 90% was going into the hotels. We've since completely moved out of the domestic market so that we can focus on the demand. And just quickly, our demand pre-COVID was about 800 kilos a week of basil. It has gone up by 400% as a result of COVID. And it's not all products are like that, but our product is. And we've been able to ramp it up, and we're now shipping about 3 times our normal levels. So there are some opportunities that we see presented by COVID, but we just have to be agile enough to be able to respond to these.
You're watching Reset Fiji with a focus on agriculture, and we're hearing directly from the farmers and those involved in agriculture. Our next panelist, he's a businessman now, but he's the son of a banana farmer from Loimaivuna in Naitasiri. He returned to the bush after graduating from the Fiji College of Agriculture. He's out of the bush now, but he still knows a lot about the bush. Wasing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stanley, for your invitation to be part of this discussion. Greetings to all the stakeholders in the agricultural sector, to all the farmers, the market vendors, to all the staff at the Ministry of Agriculture, and all the other NGO organizations. I realize as part of this series, you want people to share their personal story. And let me tell you that I've often been touted as a success story, as the boy from the bush, who made it big in farming and made a lot of money. And what is the secret of my success? But I really think that is not the question that people should be asking. The profound question that people should be asking is, why am I not farming anymore? And why my children do not want to be farmers anymore? At the same time, I realize that a lot of policymakers extol the virtue of agriculture, the nobility of farming, and yet they themselves invest very little in agriculture, and neither do they want their children to go into farming. And the question is, why is that? The title of this discussion is called Reset Fiji. We're trying to reset agriculture. But in many ways, agriculture, unlike other industries, cannot be simply switched on. You cannot, if it's not working like your computer, press the reset button. It is a product of biological and genetic processes, resources, and it takes time to develop. But once it is let to run down, once farms are let to run down and a generation of people go off the land, it is probably very, very hard and taking a lot of resources to get the farms back on. I go back to my farm now in Lomaivuna, and I look at the place now. It's full of African tulip trees. That probably cost me $10,000 per acre just to clear and to get it back into a proper farmland. So it is not simply of talking about switching on agriculture, just like you switch on an industry like construction or perhaps tourism or the garment industry. It is a long-term commitment of financial and human resources to the land. Let me also tell you of the fact that there's so many reports and studies that has been made into agriculture, into crops and commodities, on the potential of our land resources, way back from the 1840s, when they look at growing cotton in the Rio Delta, when they look at rubber, macadamia, tea, coffee, cocoa, rice, bananas, and beef, dairy, you name it, we have done studies on it. And the question is, what has happened all those years? And my friend Dr. Andrew McGregor here, who has been writing all these studies and reports over the last 40 years, has probably written hundreds of these papers out of the thousands and thousands that exist today. I'm not sure if anyone reads them. But today, I'd like to touch on probably four issues that perhaps we can discuss. That I think is very important, to see our way forward. And this basically is addressing what are the actual binding constraints that has stopped agriculture developing to its full potential, despite all these studies and extolation of its virtues and potentials and so on. And these four issues are, and I think we'll come back to that in detail later if you want to. And this is, one, of course, is our natural environment. Our natural environment, as Levi says, is our land resources. And I bear in mind that the suitability of a land, the suitability of the land resources does not mean accessibility. The natural environment tempered by our social and cultural factors. The second factor that I think we should be discussing is, why is investment in agriculture so low? We all know that the Reserve Bank, I think the government from time to time wanted to impose or encourage certain percentage lending to agriculture. I think about 10 years back, I think there was a rule that there should be a minimum of 4% lending to the agriculture sector. But I look at the figures today, and this is the figures that I've got from 2018. We actually have about 7.4 billion, that's $7,400 million of total loan or lending out there in the total of Fiji, 7.4 billion in 2018. And of that, to the agricultural sector, it's only 174 million, which is around about or less than around about 2%, or maybe even less than 2%. The lending to sugar is 20 million, which is less than the lending to high purchase for people to buy TVs and washing machines. So what are the factors that affect investment in agriculture, financial? And you also talk about for investment, you're talking about investment of human resources. People do not want to study agriculture. The best and the brightest do not want to become farmers or become agriculture. The smart women perhaps do not want to marry farmers. I was very lucky, I had a good woman who supported me. But these are the facts that a lot of us, a lot of people out there see themselves as the last generation of farmers. The third factor that we should be talking about, and this is the critical factor I think that will affect agriculture, is what are the factors that affect production? Agriculture in an industry that you actually can't fake it. I think in the Bible it says that by their fruits thou shalt know them. And you cannot jumpstart agriculture by making a lot of motivational speeches or public relations and so on. There are real problems out there which need to be solved, technical problems. I just had a call from a farmer from Tawini today. And he was asking me what he shall do about his cover, which is being affected. I realized straight away it's a dieback disease. Now that dieback disease has been there for maybe 2 or 3 decades. The agriculture has made some feeble efforts to look at it, but it has not been solved. Other problems like I mentioned before, the African tulips. I raised the problem of African tulips way back in the 1980s. Then I actually made a formal submission to the Agriculture Department around about 20 years ago. Nothing was done. I think there was a brief consultation by the FAO. Nothing was done. Now it's so widespread that it's probably costing our agricultural sector hundreds of millions of dollars and impossible to solve. So we really need our capability in research, in solving real problems. The other problem, not the problem, the other issue I guess we should be talking about is what is the role of government and how does good agricultural policy affect the development of the agricultural sector? We've looked back through the many years from the pre-cession times, colonial days, and post-independence on policies on import substitution, then export-led strategies, a lot of subsidies going on. These are the actual role of the Ministry of Agriculture. What are their roles and how they can work with the private sector in developing in boosting the sector? These are four important issues that I think we need to address, and we have to find out the binding constraint. There's one more thing that I like to address before I hand back the mic, and I talk about the factors affect investment. One of the biggest problems, as all farmers know, that has been there for many years but left unspoken, is the issue of agricultural farm theft. I did a Google search this morning, and I typed in the words agricultural theft in Fiji. And to my amazement, 946,000 results came out, or related results came out in about 1 second. They may not all relate to Fiji, but but you can see the amount of complaints or discussions online on this one. You go to any place in Fiji and you ask them, they have that problem. I think the Minister of Agriculture in January, he put out a press release that he was going to tackle this problem in a meeting in Tailevu. He said he will form a special task force or liaise with the police to do this. And I think this is another problem that he has probably found it a bit too hard to solve and has left it as it is for the time being. Thank you.
Well, before I open up open the floor to the audience for their questions, I just want to ask that those agricultural theft, what does that tell you? What does that mean?
Well, agricultural theft is very demoralizing to farmers. The cost of agricultural theft is, there's a lot of issue to it. One is probably that the lack of enforcement. Farmers report theft and police find it very hard to do anything about it. And I guess it's become so prevalent that with the lack of enforcement, with the penalties, with a lot of what I might call social or cultural reinforcement into the value of growing your own food. It is becoming very prevalent in the peri-urban areas, in the rural areas. It is a big problem. I'm not sure how to solve that one, but that is one of the actual reasons that I'm not able to farm anymore. I've got land in Tavuni. I've got capital to do it, but as somebody told me, that unless I'm there living on the farm, it's actually pointless to plan anything.
Yeah, come.
A lot of it's driven by greed. There's no doubt about that, and particularly the carver theft. People it's an easy way to earn money, and it's greed. But now that's being reinforced by need. You've got no income, so you're forced to steal. So you've got that deadly combination. So it's I think the increase of farm theft is, and we've got plenty of indications about that. That's a key issue of people going back to the land. And the other one is the interesting one that Wah raised is people don't know how to farm, and there's a real conflict here. The agriculture is promoting carver production, great, but you see their posters, they're talking about big but large areas being planted, cutting down all the trees, all the money. They'll have a picture of a four-wheel drive, the money and the house you're going to build. But, what about our experience with carver dieback, which Wah mentioned? You really have to do it properly, and we're developing, and talk about Taviuni with the Tutu Rural Training Centre, the young farmers introducing systems of agroforestry, mixing crops together, a way of minimising this dieback problem. Because if you go down that other route, lessons we've learned, this has been around, as I said, for 20 or 30 years, you're going to end up with nothing. And so we've got these two problems of increasing theft, but coming back to land and just adopting non-sustainable practices. You've got to address both those issues. I'd just like to add that.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience today? Yes. If you can introduce yourself, where you're from, and your question, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for excellent presentations. My name's Claire Slatter, and I'm a retired academic and active researcher still. I thank you, Mrs. Komaita Toya, particularly. I'm glad that you spoke about women in agriculture. I have been looking at very briefly, a report that just came out last year. It's the FAO's gender assessment on agriculture and the rural sector. And amongst its findings, one of the main things was that women in agriculture continue to be, well, unaccounted, their work or their contribution to agriculture is unaccounted and unrecognized. And this didn't surprise me, this finding, but I was rather saddened by the fact that this is still the situation, because this was known from the 70s, the 80s. Women in the agricultural sector, and particularly in the subsistence or semi-subsistence sector, we know play a major role. It's almost kind of seen as an extension of their engagement in care work. They're just providing food for the family. And because of that, it's not recognized. It's unremunerated work if you're in the subsistence sector. But we know that in the subsistence sector, people are basically living semi-subsistence livelihoods, as you know. And we're talking about, you know, selling the surplus and earning income from that. And supply and demand factors, meaning that you can't earn as much. So, you know, I have one of the first question is, how do you get women the support they need? It's neglected in the sense that they don't have access perhaps to the extension officers and to other kinds of inputs and supports that might make their production more productive or whatever. How does one improve that, women's access to services and to resources like loans, whatever? And how do you put them in touch with those supply chains that would mean that they can tap into the higher incomes that may be available through exporting part of what they produce? But the other thing is, sorry, if I may just ask another question. Fiji's supposed to be having an agricultural census this year. I don't know whether it went ahead because it was supposed to have taken place in February. But, you know, there's an opportunity there to actually really look at women's contribution to agriculture. And my third wee point is FAO also did a gender assessment. Sorry, I mentioned that one. There's this, anyway, I'll let that go. There was a third report that I was going to cite, but yeah, thank you.
Claire. Can ask Lavinia if you'd like to respond to that, and then we'll get the other with the panel. When you see the image of the farmers that come out in the posters, the popular image, obviously it's a man. How do we change it? How do we get more women involved and recognized in the agricultural sector?
Okay, thank you, Stanley. Mrs. Slatter, thank you. I guess we just start small. From my aspect, and again in my role as with PIFON, I've really advocated for women in agriculture. So in PIFON itself, we've institutionalized women in agriculture, making sure that our program, one particular program that we have is specifically women in agriculture and nutrition. If we could just start with policymakers doing that. A great example is floriculture, flowers. Floriculture, flowers, is not considered a commodity in our sector, but flowers provide a livelihood for women. And this is something that the Floriculture Support Association is advocating, is to get floriculture to be recognized as a commodity in the Ministry of Agriculture, because when it becomes recognized, then there's going to be assistance towards floriculture, there's going to be grants towards it, there's going to be training, there's just a whole spectrum. But just recognizing at least flowers as a commodity. The usual answer we get is, we don't need flowers. But in Asia they do, right? And this issue is prevalent regionally in the Pacific. So we're trying to do it to start here in Fiji. And these are policy issues. We need policymakers to change the laws so that women can be recognized. And when you start with that, it helps.
Yeah, that's an ongoing issue, and it makes absolutely no sense. You know, as in my introduction, food security is about growing food or generating income to be able to buy food. And flowers for these peri-urban and urban households are a very good way for a household to generate income from which they're going to buy food. And women in that area take a really key role. And why it's never been recognised as an agricultural product is utter nonsense, and that needs to change. That is a key thing that's got to be a part of our reset. Naka.
I'll come to you. I just wanted to bring up this question, this point to you panelists. Talking about the agriculture, we're talking about reset, and we're talking about the agriculture ministry. What changes would you like to see within the ministry for it to be more effective as part of reset? And in asking that, I just want to point out the budget for agriculture. In the 2019-2020 budget, it was 78.7 million. Of that, 35 was on operating and 40 was on capital. That's not counting sugar. Sugar, there was 70.4 million. So the sugar budget was just almost as much as the agriculture ministry. And then the other component of the agriculture ministry was waterways. It got 34 million. So looking at that, and with that in mind, I'd like to just ask, maybe start with Levi, and to Kyle, and then to Wa, on what kind of changes would you like to see as part of the reset within the agriculture ministry to make it more effective?
I think I've always mentioned to my friends that the agriculture ministry needs a super budget. Yeah? I'm looking at a tune to of like 1 billion. Yeah. Because there's always been this complaint of under-resourced staff, no vehicles, no fuel, extension officers in remote areas cannot do their job because they are under-resourced. Eh? So, and if you, just by hearing those numbers that you've mentioned, we've really been under-resourced in regards to the budget. Eh? So if you have a super budget, one that will just basically you can roll out in a year and just provide solutions to all these pending issues that they're basically legacy issues. Eh? That's the problem from past governments till now. They haven't been able to really put a good figure on agriculture. So if you put a good super budget there to the tune of like 1 billion, then you're really talking a sense. Eh? Because then you give them the firepower, then you give them the resources, and then you'll be able to push issues that we're talking about. Eh? Apart from policies, I think they really need to have a good budget.
I'll come to you. Because I'll get Wa to respond to that point, and we'll get to you.
Thank you, Stanley. Actually, about 10 years ago, I did a review of the agricultural ministry with Professor Duncan as part of the FAO development project. I'm not sure what happened to that paper, whether anybody has read it or not, but we did publish a summary of it in the Pacific Economic Bulletin in 2009. And what we found out was quite revealing. Basically, the core role of agriculture, what they should be doing, is very under-resourced. And the core, and we believe the core function of any agriculture, the modern agriculture department in the world now, is doing research, doing adaptive technology, and passing that on to the farmers, as Lavinia said. We need to solve technical problems on soil fertility, pest and disease control, post-harvest handling. In the 30 or 40 years ago, when I was a student at the agricultural college, you would see Fiji was one of the leading publishers of agricultural research in the world. New varieties of rice, new varieties of taro, cropping systems were done. There was soil conservation projects and so on. This is not the case anymore. A lot of these functions actually are not within the agriculture department anymore. They're actually done by NGOs, like the South Pacific Commission and other foreign aid projects. The other weakness that we found in the agriculture department, which we think, with all due respect to the policymakers and the leadership in government today, is a very weak policy-making division within the Ministry of Agriculture. And this is exactly due to, as Claire said, the importance of data. We just had a agricultural census that was completed, I think, in February. And we're still waiting for the results. Unless we get real data, accurate data from the field, and do proper analysis of that one, of those data, anything that, any policy or anything that, or discuss that we might have agriculture development project, as my former lecturer in agriculture would say, without data, it's just a fairy time bad tale story. So those are the two things: research and good policy making, whether we analyzing our comparative trade advantages, our capabilities in the land, our human resources, understanding the risk and the sensitivity of the markets. Those are very important. What has happened now is a lot of the agriculture work is doing, as you say, free handouts and what they call demand-driven assistance and so on in the last few years. And I think that is not their role. Their role is to protect the environment and provide innovation and disseminate those new technologies. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to follow on both what Wah said and Levi. Yeah, I'd agree about a super budget, more funding, but how that money is used, and that ties into what Wah's saying. A lot of research and extension can be done by the farmer organisations, people on the ground, working with agriculture. We're a small country and industries are small. They're not going to be able to do it like large industry you have in Australia, New Zealand, the United States, etc. But working together, at Nature's Way Cooperative, where Levi is the chairman, over the last decade we've been trying to establish a research and extension capability. And that's become an increasing challenge to be able to fund that, because we don't have the export, so we don't have the money. That's a way that you're going to be able to generate the production and the quality of the products. The Fiji red papaya, which we all enjoy, is a product of that work. But that's where the money has to be going. So more funding, but reallocating it in the ways that we've been talking about it. We don't need more of the same. That's just not going to help. And I'd like to recommend Wah Singh and Professor Duncan's paper. I'll give you the link, and I think you should post that. I think it's time to re-look at it. It was written how long ago? 10, 15 years ago? But it's still very, very relevant. You have a link, but I can send it to you, and I've been actually referring quite a bit to it. Nothing's new. We're not talking about anything new. These are things people like Wah have been talking about for decades, and we need to re-look at them. A lot of the answers or what we're doing, it's more of the same challenges that we're facing, all to do with sustainable agriculture. Sustainable means environmentally sustainable and also commercially sustainable, economically sustainable. They're together. You can't just look at one and not the other. And we've sort of abandoned the sustainable environmental side, and to the detriment of being commercially viable. Carver's the greatest example, and this broad acre that they're promoting, it's going to be a disaster. We're going to get dieback everywhere, and suddenly that industry is going to collapse. And we know how to do it. All the work has been done. Let's get it out there and get the right information to people.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Hello? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Bulavinaka, I'm Marioni Tavakaturanga, and I'm from the Social Empowerment and Education Program. And we are a NGO organization based here in Fiji. Agriculture is actually a new area of work that our NGO is planning to go into, so this panel was a really keen interest of ours, and I really congratulate and thank each of the esteemed panelists for a really good intervention that you've provided. My question today is basically somewhat connected to the economy panel. Some of the messages that came out of that was on strengthening resilience, innovative ways of coping, and also strengthening traditional knowledge and strengthening the rural economy. My question to the panel today is basically on in terms of agriculture, and there was, ideas and points around the importance of agriculture in terms of growing the economy. And I know in terms of farmers associations and corporations, supply would be a key aspect, a key factor in that. In terms of growing the rural economy and also bringing into that corporations, do you see that as a strength in engaging and growing the rural economy? And also trying to address the conventional model of economics, which is almost based on competition. How does that balance off with corporations, which is more based on farmers working together in terms of providing supply and income for each other? I'm also taking into consideration what Mr. Torre had mentioned about the urban to rural drift, which is something that is inevitable during this time. So how does that also fit into this?
Okay,
Naka.
thank you for the question. Kyle, would you like to have a go at that? And I'll pass it to Levi or any of the other panelists.
Yeah, thank you. We talk about the role of farm organizations and cooperatives, and there are a lot of opportunities, as Lavinia mentioned, as Andrew mentioned, providing access to planting material, providing access to services, information. We don't have a lot of examples of very successful cooperatives involved in direct marketing. And in this scenario, I would say that the private sector companies that do exist, that have established markets, that have the infrastructure, that have the technical know-how to market, they should be working with cooperatives to be able to link up with the farmers, and we don't need to be cutting out middlemen. We don't need to be cutting out exporters. There's this idea that the more intermediaries you have, the less return that's coming back to the farmers. But if you actually look at a lot of these value chains, the farm organizations, the cooperatives, the exporters, they all play a very important role in getting a product from the farm all the way to the market. And so the idea that we will form cooperatives to replace the private sector, I think, is flawed. Don't take my word for it. We have a tool called value chain analysis that looks at from the product all the way to the end consumer and all the steps along the way. And when you start to do that type of analysis, you'll see why we need exporters, why we need these middlemen, these market vendors, these intermediaries. And so a key policy message should be support the private sector. Support the market vendors, support the fresh produce traders, but educate the farmers as well to understand their piece of the pie and to know how they can grow that piece of the pie to put more money into their pockets.
Levi, can we compete yet cooperate?
I think one of the key focus should be on educating the next generation of farmers. And if you look around, you only have Cornivia, there's probably Navuso Agriculture, and then you have the Tutu Rural Training Center, amongst others. So from my view, I think we should be paying attention to this new generation of farmers. The whole syllabus should be modified, so we are gearing up to this post-COVID pandemic. I think our syllabus that have been used for the past years is outdated, and I think we should be getting in more subjects that are in tune with what we are facing at the moment. And going back to what Kyle was saying, in regards to value chain training, really understanding the whole supply chain from the farmer right up to the point of sale. And these are things you don't hear back in school, back in agriculture school. Nobody, I mean, everybody knows how to plant cassava and all the things that you learn in school, but to actually articulate it. If you ask farmers, do you know anything about value chain, supply chain? They have no idea. They only know their role as farmers. But if you give them the value chain concept or idea, then they'll have a broad vision of what agriculture is like. And then they'll know the risks that are involved, and people will make more informed decisions. And that's a key message. If you understand the good things and the bad things about farming, and if we can get our new farmers who are coming up to act that way or to respond that way, then we'll have people who are making more informed decisions and more constructive headways, opposed to everybody getting into farming and then trying to push products to your market, and then you have oversupply, and then you have all this the chaos in the market. We've had lots of experiences where farmers have been told to plant papaya, plant eggplant, plant cassava, plant dalo, and then you have this oversupply, and then it goes back to the farmer. They can't sell because there's too much product in the market, and everybody loses out. But if you are well versed with value chain training, you'll be able to counter all these problems. So going back to educating our new farmers, opposed to the normal things that we get to learn in agricultural training centers or rural training centers. That's my view.
Thank you. I'll come to you. As you can see, we are hearing directly from the farmers, not just the people who make public speeches and all the nice statements, fancy statements about how we need agriculture. We're talking about people who've lived through, who are on the ground, who've lived through the experiences. I just wanted to touch on the point, to get to you, he talked about the next generation of farmers. And I was wondering, where's the next generation of farmers? But you had a point, and then maybe you can tie that in.
Well, first of all, let me talk about the topic we've just been discussing on marketing and value chain. In a way, I've been fortunate. I've been through all those roles. I was a farmer, planting crops and selling to the middlemen. I've sold in the supermarket. I became an exporter. I became an industrial processor of ginger, doing about 1,000 tons of ginger. And I understand one thing that people do not understand. It is the nature of the agriculture industry and farming to have our ups and downs. There is no such thing as a guaranteed market for agricultural produce, despite what some politicians go around saying, that they will guarantee the market. There is no such thing, because ultimately it is the consumers who will choose what to eat and how much to pay and where to buy from. Unless you're a prisoner, perhaps you can force them to eat certain things. But that is the nature of things. But if you're a smart farmer, you will know how to mitigate and calculate those risks. And one of the things, as Kyle has said, in Fiji, a lot of times our middlemen has been vilified. They're saying they are the curse of society. They're doing, making a lot of profits, for nothing. Recently in the lockdown, they did not have a good view of middlemen. But the middleman is an essential, plays an essential role in the farming system in Fiji, especially when there are so many smallholders, in many remote areas. Without them, the market in Fiji simply cannot function. And we go and address the question of the next generation of farmers. This thing we have to accept. As a society modernizes, less and and less people will want to be farmers. With the improvement of technology, we produce more food, either in Fiji or overseas, that that can fit many more people. I think in Australia, the number of farmers is actually about 3%. 95% of the people live in the urban area. The same thing is happening across China now. China now modernizing. You go to the back to the villages. Farming is actually a part-time job now. Most of the rice harvesting, the sowing is all done by machinery. And unless we modernize, unless we take the drudgery out of farming, you will find that it is not appealing. And I go back to, I think the government have a program called School for Gardens. I'm not sure what has come of that, but there was a big announcement, I think in the last budget, that some money to it. One of the problems that I find with gardening in schools is basically physical education. Gardening should be about science and how we improve yields and do things successfully in the garden. But all throughout my boarding school days, my college days, it seems that the gardening is a form of physical punishment. I think I've been like I said earlier, I've been taught that as example. Why can't people be like Wasing? He graduated from the Fiji College of Agriculture. I was the only student that that went back farming. The rest of my classmates went and got jobs at the FDB and Minister of Agriculture, and they point at me and say, "Hey, that guy's a millionaire now. He must have made a lot of money in ginger or taro or something." And the question to ask is, why am I no longer continuing? Because the reality of farming, it is very hard work. I remember going back to the farm and I used to carry like 20 bags of cassava, run from the bottom of the hill on my shoulder up to the top of the hill on a rainy day. My wife had to carry my youngest daughter, the baby, in the back of a bag on a rainy day, harvesting taro. And it was very, and as you know, harvesting taro, you get very itchy. and so on. It's to get the next generation farmers, we have to start with the people, the people who are actually working on the farms already. And a good example of that is the Tutu Training Center, and perhaps Andrew can talk a bit of that. How we can keep those people on the farm?
Vinia, thank you for that one.
Thank you, Stanley. I want to add to the question and also the question before. I think one of the reasons is we need to invest more in agricultural scholarships. And there's not enough scholarships being given to agriculture. Children or students don't see the potential that we need more agronomists, more vets, more plant scientists, more soil scientists. They just think that when you study agriculture, you're going to get your hands dirty, you're going to be out in the field. But there's actually exciting jobs in agriculture. And we need to make it more cool, more sexy for youth. We need to have IT, digital for platforms, and make it smart for them. And I think another one, and this is what I did at home with my kids, I showed them the gross margins for farming. We planted watermelon, trying to get them to help us to harvest or to plant it and all. But it wasn't until we harvested that they saw the benefit. And I'm getting questions like, how many did we plant? How much we're going to make? How much kilos? And then I gave it back to them and I showed them, okay, from this many plants, this is the percentage, this is the gross margin that you make. And when they see the money, they get excited. So that's, we just need to package it differently. It's all about marketing, not the punishment aspect, but the money aspect.
Thank you. I thought, wow, really discouraged quite a few people there from farming. But, I think the reality is important to talk about. It. Like time has caught up on us, and obviously, I'll come to that, Andrew. I'll come to you. Agriculture obviously is a wide and extensive industry, and what we've talked about here is just some components. There's many other components that's there that we haven't touched, and I think what we're trying to do here is to stimulate discussion about how we rethink, reimagine, reset, and come up with the realities and the new policies or the new ideas that can fire up now that everybody's all fired up about agriculture from their backyard gardenings and hopefully and beyond. So we've just started on components and stimulate ideas. As I said, time has caught up on us, but before we finish, I'd like to give the panelists time to round up. The key question is, how do we reset? What do we do in the short term, medium term, and long term? Thank you. Start with Andy.
And I'd just like to go back to a few comments were made from the question from the floor, what Wah was saying and what Lavinier said. Yeah, I think a key issue is making farming interesting. You've got to make it interesting. Tutu Rural Training Centre, we've talked about running these soil schools, and young farmers coming in, they'd proven themselves at home before they came into Tutu, but then they got into these soil schools when they were taught the science of growing crops, and that's really made a difference. And that's now, they're adopting these practices, and it's very important that this now gets taken to the broader community. A lot of what you're doing is bringing back what traditional knowledge we had before, and that question was raised from the floor. We've got to bring in some of that in terms of sustainable agriculture, learning from the past, what's relevant, bringing it in terms of sustainable agriculture. So it's all these, a new approach to training, I think, is absolutely critical. Who provides the training, who provides the information, making it interesting and making it remunerative, which it can be. These farmers who go through the Tutu system, I wish I was earning their level of income, but it's not an easy task. It's a long haul, and it's nothing easy. But if it's done properly, with the right information, the right sort of people, then it can be very successful. And that's a lot of the government resources. The public sector resources, I think, is probably a better word for it, not just the government. We're talking about donors as well. The public sector, that's the Fiji government, and donors, etc., have to be looking at this area of funding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's not just pressing the reset button. Eh? Levi, come to you, and also, if you can, in your concluding remarks, also talk about knowing climate change is an issue now, and we need resilience. As much as we're trying to get resilient from COVID-19, this climate change is there. So the resilience, you can tie that into your closing remarks, please.
Yeah, thank you. So just 3 points. One is accessibility to land for people in the village, mostly the people in the rural areas. Secondly, to boost these agricultural training centers, Cornivia, Navuso, Tutu, and all these other rural training centers. This is where our next generation of farmers are being bred. And thirdly, which ties into climate change, is research in regards to the Ministry of Agriculture. If you look at all these big countries, even the small Pacific Island countries, research is basically heading the ministry, and the rest of the departments follow. So the research division should be very well equipped, very well funded to drive us into the future. Thank you very much.
Vinaka Stanley, researcher. I want to throw in value-adding initiatives. In Samoa, they're miles ahead of us in Fiji because they have SROS. It's a research organization, but they specify specifically on value add. And so they have an industry, a cottage industry, where backyard, they're producing, products. In Fiji, we can do that too. Again, I allude to the question last week on the care economy. In Fiji, we have our mothers' clubs, we have the Songo Wakamarama, we have community clubs. There could be pilot projects where there's investment into and training, also equipment, HACCP, on how we can value add and make chutneys, make sauces. And we can look at the list of imports, import substitution that go into the tourism market, and we won't replace everything, but maybe we can replace some. And we can get these mothers' clubs going, we can get these communities working on this. In Tutu Rural Training Center, that's our pilot project. They have breadfruit flour going, they have preservatives, jams, chutneys, frozen fruit. Friend is leading the way in as one of our members in pushing value add. This is also an opportunity to jumpstart small, micro, medium enterprises. Again, last week there was the discussion that the rural sector right now, 60% of it is pushing the economy, holding the economy today. So if we have to reset, let's continue to invest in there, because there has been no investment. Where it is today was really on initiative. But if we pump the resources in, I'm sure we can have a vibrant SME industry in this area.
And the growth will come from there.
Yes.
All right. Kyle.
I mean, I think all the panelists have highlighted the key areas that are needed to be addressed for this reset. I think, though, for the people that don't have jobs, for the people that are playing around in their backyard or have gone back to their villages, I think my message is, don't wait for something to fall out of the sky. Don't wait for this massive policy change. Look around. Look at your neighbor, look at an experienced farmer. What can you draw from them? What can you learn from them? How can you share planting materials, share tips and tricks? Because at the end of the day, farmers helping farmers is the way that we can make steps today to help improve our growing situation. And I've just seen a lot of people that spend a lot of time waiting for something to somebody to help them or something to fall out. And I'm just weary that you're going to be waiting for a long time. And I've been a little bit of a part of this Barter for Better Fiji, and to see the exchange of planting materials and people coming to my farm, exchanging planting materials, but then we talk and we exchange ideas. And I'm just very aware of the fact that there is a lot of expertise from people that are not so-called experts. So take advantage of that, and I think we really can make some quick inroads to growing more food and to improving the livelihoods in agriculture.
Yeah, thank you. I think some of us, and you and I, have been around long enough to know that nothing much will change over the next few years.
19 might change things. What?
Every time I hear big plans, I always get out this cutting. This is from the Fiji Sun, February 2017, and it says, sugar to be made $1 billion industry by 2017. That was, now we are in 2020, and I think our sugar industry is about 15% of that. But one thing I'm very hopeful about in Fiji is that despite all our setbacks, all our lack of initiatives, Fiji is probably the best place to be in the world right now. And if you are to be shipwrecked anywhere in the world during an economic crisis in a time like this, the place is Fiji, probably in Kandavu or Tavinos or Takondravi or somewhere there, where there's plenty of warmth, plenty of food in the forest, and plenty of marine resources in the sea. Because let me tell you a story that was related to me by an ex-diplomat in China. Yes, the vice president of China was here on his way, I think, en route to Chile, and he was supposed to have a few days stop over here, and then he looked around and he saw the people so relaxed coming out of the sea with their fish. and you see the breadfruits in the tree, and people having such a happy and carefree life, despite not doing much. And as this diplomat told me, he mentioned to him, he said, you know, after staying in Fiji for a few days, I now realize, I know now why you Fijians think slowly. And that is not a luxury that is afforded to many nations around the world. And the lesson to draw from that is that we need to protect our environment. Our tropical ecosystem, despite what some people might think is very fertile, the greenery and all that, is actually very fragile. It's just a very thin layer of topsoil which is heavily leached and can be eroded. And the lesson you can see from other countries like Haiti, once you destroy your natural environment, life will become very hard.
Thank you. We could listen to more stories from Moa and go on. It's a very interesting discussion, but time has caught up on us, and I'd like to give a big thanks to the panelists for all the ideas, the solutions that you've shared with us today. Farmers helping farmers. I think that's quite an idea, perhaps, to do this reset from, and other interesting ideas that has been raised today. So that's the agriculture panel on this Reset Fiji series. Again, we value your feedback and opinions, and we're going to be having some polls again from this panel. So we'd like you to engage in our public polls. You can go to the Reset Fiji page on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and then the results of the public poll will be posted up in the next panel. Our next panel next week will be on the environment, so stay tuned for that. But from the agriculture panel for today, Bena Valevo.